In paleontology, there are two large groups when it comes to identifying animals: the mergers and the splitters. Basically, the idea is that the mergers are trying to put every animal they find into a pre-existing category as much as it is possible. The splitters, on the other hand, will call every find that has even minor differences from what has been found before a new species and give it a new name. Now, these two groups are clearly at odds with one another, and they have a long history going back. There have been competitions between scientists who finds the most new species, and yeah, of course, that lent itself to naming as many species as possible with as minor as a difference as there could be found. So we have a pretty chaotic situation sometimes with dinosaur namings. And Jurassic Park and Jurassic World have really bad luck about this with their sauropods. Because sauropods are big, sauropods are spectacular, so scientists really like to name sauropods and argue about the naming and the categorization and what sauropod is what sauropod. So yeah, this lends itself to chaos. Now, to start, we have 3 different sauropods in the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World movies. And the good news is Mamenchisaurus, that only appeared for a short scene in The Lost World, that one is safe. Because Mamenchisaurus is pretty much impossible to confuse with any other sauropod we know. The very long neck with the relatively short tail, that's Mamenchisaurus. There's no confusion there. Now, when we get to the other two, it becomes more complicated. So, Brachiosaurus. Here's where it gets complicated. Originally, this was pretty straightforward. In 1903, Brachiosaurus was found in North America, or rather, it was described in 1903. It was found 2 or 3 years before that as a new dinosaur that was quite different from the ones known before. A very large, very heavy animal with a very distinctive skull that lived in the late Jurassic alongside most other giant sauropods like Diplodocus and Apatosaurus. A few years later, in 1912 and described in 1914, a very similar dinosaur was found in Africa, in the German colony of East German Africa. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Nowadays known as Tanzania, and was also described as Brachiosaurus because it was a very similar animal, and it was just logical to assign it the same name. It wasn't until 1988 that paleontologist Greg Paul, who we will meet again when we come to the raptors, took a look at his fossils, a very close look, and concluded that those are not the same animal at all. Every bone in the African Brachiosaurus seemed to be different from the North American Brachiosaurus. So Paul created a new dinosaur for the African one, which was then named Giraffatitan, which honestly that's a stupid name, but well, he got the right to name it, and he named it, and now it's called Giraffatitan. So with Brachiosaurus and Giraffatitan existing, which one does Jurassic Park actually feature? Well, if we look at both of these animals and compare them, we can see that Giraffatitan is different in having far higher shoulders. This is interesting because both of them have longer arms than hind legs, which is very unusual. but it's more pronounced with Giraffatitan than with Brachiosaurus. Giraffatitan also has a notable hump where his shoulders are, and it has a skull that has a much more pronounced forehead than a Brachiosaurus had. And if we look at these features, yep, all of these features can be seen in the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World Brachiosaurus. So, yeah, that's just not Brachiosaurus at all. That is Giraffatitan. However, with a name like that, I don't blame him for calling it Brachiosaurus. And now we get to the mess that is Apatosaurus. So, in 1877, Othniel Charles Marsh, a famous paleontologist of the time, found a new dinosaur he named Apatosaurus. Nothing unusual there, but Apatosaurus was one of the first dinosaurs discovered in what was later called the Bone Wars, a competition between Marsh and paleontologist Charles Drinker Cope, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, who would find the most new dinosaurs. And just 2 years after Marsh had found the Apatosaurus, he found a very similar dinosaur in the same area of North America and called it the Brontosaurus. And the Brontosaurus was quite a controversial find. For starters, it did not have an accurate skull. The one Marsh put on there didn't quite seem to belong there, and indeed, later it was found out that the skull he put on the Brontosaurus, when he first published that animal, was the skull of a Brachiosaurus. And funny enough, by that point, nobody knew what the skull of a Brachiosaurus looked like because nobody had found it yet. So, yeah, Brontosaurus got disputed early on, and by 1909, it was basically declared non-existent. But in popular culture, the name Brontosaurus lived on. It was just such a nice name. It meant thunder lizard, and that was spectacular. That was great. People love that. So you will find Brontosaurus in books up until the 1980s and beyond. There's toys produced of this animal called Brontosaurus pretty much all the time until in 2015 a study actually found that Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus were different enough to warrant different names. And so Brontosaurus reappeared, this time with a more correct head. The head was more like that of a Diplodocus or a Apatosaurus. But yeah, Brontosaurus got reinstated. And that's really confusing. The same year that happened, Jurassic World got into cinemas. And so we have to ask, what dinosaur is the Apatosaurus portrayed in Jurassic World? Now, if you look at a Apatosaurus skeleton and a Brontosaurus skeleton, what is immediately obvious is the neck. For a sauropod, who usually have very slender necks, that is a massive neck. Even more so on a Apatosaurus than on Brontosaurus. Those necks are really, really wide. And if you look at the Jurassic World dinosaur, that's basically all you need to know. The neck of this animal is not as absurdly thick as that of Apatosaurus, so yeah, funny enough, this is a Brontosaurus. I say funny because the name Brontosaurus is practically synonymous with inaccurate depictions of dinosaurs, and yet this is one example where it actually would have been accurate, but Jurassic World just had the misfortune of coming out the same year Brontosaurus was reinstated as a separate animal, so they had no chance to actually get this right, because by the time the movie was made, it was still called Apatosaurus. But what we end up with is a movie that has, no, a franchise that has 3 sauropod dinosaurs, 2 of which got the wrong name. Just because paleontologists are constantly debating these issues. What dinosaur is what dinosaur? And they just got bad luck with which ones they picked. So if you ever hear of a dinosaur having never existed, or a dinosaur suddenly appearing without new fossils appearing, this is usually what happened. Some kind of dispute between the mergers and the splitters, and then things get confusing.